back to the Most Amazing Top 10. I'm your host, Melissa Melotti, and today we're going to talk about the top 10 unsettling discoveries that archaeologists don't want you to know about. So let's jump right into it. First up, in our 10th spot today, we have screaming mummies. Okay, when you think of a classic mummy, what do you see? I'm going to assume you just replied, I see the mummy's face, and it looks like it's screaming as its mouth is, wide open. For a very long time, it was believed that mummies found with their mouth open were possibly people that were tortured to death, especially those found with their hands bounded together. But in most recent years, scientists have learned how silly that theory might be because most mummies are actually found with that permanent screaming expression. During the mummification process, if the jaw isn't strapped shut, then the jaw naturally falls open when it begins to decay. But then again, we're also sure that some of the mummies were most likely buried alive, but it is possible that it could be too hard at this point to fully know. In our number 9 spot today is the mass grave of the Headless Vikings. It was a sunny day. Just another casual digging expedition for these archaeologists, digging up the side of an old roadway in Dorset, UK. But suddenly, they dug up something extraordinary. It was a grave site for 54 Vikings, and they were all headless. The leg and arm bones and heads and torsos were all together neatly in separate piles. The archaeologists didn't know what to make of this, so their theory was that these people were captured by the locals and they were murdered and dismembered by the villagers who took some of their heads for souvenirs. Well, that's terrifying. Later on, they revamped that theory and they believed that perhaps that this was some kind of ritualistic sacrifice performed at this time. Yeah, perhaps scientists didn't want us to know this because, well, that is terrifying. Coming up in today's 8th spot, we have something that I personally think is highly unsettling, and I would like to inquire as to why wasn't this on the news stations everywhere around the world when it was discovered? Because this one is kinda hard to believe that it is real. Oh, what is it? Oh, it's just a cat that was carved into the hills of Peru. Yep, a cat. Come on, a cat? That's so creepy. I mean, I'm a dog person myself, so perhaps I'm a little biased, but I mean, cultures have been known to worship and honor the cat throughout centuries, including the Egyptians and, well, North Americans nowadays. They have, a lot of crazy cat ladies, but who knows, maybe there's a higher reason that cats were continuously worshipped and perhaps we should honor them. This cat geoglyph was found in the Nazca Desert and it is said to be the oldest one in its region, dating to 200 BC to 100 BC. The cat is apparently 120 feet. Wow, how isn't this more known? I'm mind blown. All the crazy cat Karens are saying, excuse me, I knew this. Coming up in our 7th spot today, we have the Tomb of Sunken Skulls. Found in the bottom of a prehistoric dry lake bed in Motala, Sweden, archaeologists stumbled upon a mysterious stone structure. After some digging, they were able to eventually unearth animal bones, stone tools, and 8,000-year-old skulls of 10 people aging from young to old. Sometimes it's hard for me to fathom that it is possible for archaeologists to know that something is really that old. Like, how is this possible? That we are able to know this, and yet we haven't made a time machine yet. But also, if you really sit and think about how far we've come in the last 100 years, it really makes you think, holy, I wish I could travel in time to see how people actually lived then. Because even with our discoveries to paint a picture, it's still quite hard to imagine. They also found fragments of one skull deliberately put into the skull of another. What purpose was this for? The archaeologists concluded that actually 11 people were butchered in a stone hut, with no other discovery as to why. But one last final horrific detail: some of the skulls had stakes embedded into them, and it was concluded that they were perhaps mounted for some funeral purpose or as a sort of trophy after the defeat of its opponents. In our 6th spot today, we have a discovery that honestly, I wish I didn't know about. For all the mothers out there that are feeling a little sensitive, definitely, close your ears to this one. While on an expedition deep in the underground sewer in Ashkelon, Israel, expecting to only find dirt and, well, poop, archaeologists discovered thousands of tiny bones. After further inspection, they discovered that the bones were of newborn babies, maybe around 100 of newborn babies. Just horrible. It wasn't completely uncommon though for ancient times to dispose of newborns, particularly girls who were considered not as valuable to the family as boys. But it is interesting though that there were actually quite a few boys that were found. It was and still is so curious that those bones were disposed of in a sewer. If I could guess, I think this sounds like the case of some religious sacrifice, but who knows? In our fifth spot today, we have the Mammoth Graveyard. An expedition in Russia led to a discovery of what looks like a graveyard of mammoth bones from 25,000 years ago. The site has been under excavation since 2014, and it is said that it measures 40 feet across. Whoa. At this point, archaeologists still don't know how it was built, and also why. What was the purpose of this? I suspect aliens. Aliens came down to Earth and had a sacrificial mammoth ceremony and then gathered all of the bones in one area and left them for us humans to eventually clean up. That sounds possible. In our fourth spot today, we have severed hands. While on an Egyptian expedition, a group of archaeologists whom were digging near the ancient city of Avaris discovered a few chopped off hands. The hands were found in what was once a throne room, and therefore there was an immediate understanding that this was some kind of gesture for the king. The team ended up discovering 14 hands, and the even more interesting part, it was all right hands. The hands are about 3,600 years old. Eventually, it was discovered that they were buried when King Kian ruled over the city. Only through reviewing ancient writing were they able to put the pieces together and see that during this time, the soldiers would present a severed right hand of his enemy to the king in exchange for gold. It was said to be a symbolic gesture, showing that they are depriving their enemy of power as they will no longer have their hand. Fascinating. It's crazy to believe that we humans once were in a headspace where we were chopping off hands so as to take other humans' power away from them. Fascinating. In our third spot today, we have the good old Neanderthals. Archaeologists have discovered that some 40,000 years ago, Belgians, also known as Neanderthals, were practicing cannibalism. They used to make a meal out of their friends and create tools out of their bones. At least they weren't wasteful. This discovery was made in a cave where Neanderthal bones were discovered along with marks of butchery. There were also bones of horses and other animals in the cave, but they seemed to be stripped apart just like the human bones were, leading the archaeologists to conclude that these Neanderthals seemed to make no distinction between man and animal, which poses the question, at what point did we start making this distinction? And are there still people who don't? Google the conspiracies around this at your own risk. In our second spot today, we have the claw. In 1986, while on an expedition on Mount Owen in New Zealand, a giant claw was found. Deep within a cave in the mountain, the archaeologists discovered this massive beast-like claw. It was eventually discovered that it was the 3,000-year-old remains of an upland moa, a flightless bird that went extinct, which you would think to be impossible as well. It kind of reminds me of how all the Kardashian-like girls wear their nails these days. I mean, how do they function with those nails? I can barely type and I barely have nails. Melissa. In our number one spot today, we have the chemical warfare. On an expedition in 1933, archaeologist Robert de Mesnil du Buisson discovered 19 Roman soldiers in a tunnel. Apparently, they all look like they died trying to flee from something. I can't imagine what during those times. Traces of sulfur and bitumen were actually found along the walls until it was eventually discovered that all signs point to this being one of the first attempts at chemical warfare. Whoa. And honestly, hopefully one of the last. That's all I'm saying. That's all the time I have for you today. I'm Melissa Malati, and good day, sir.